on to international organizations. And if we are economic with time, we could finish in a few minutes before we all retire to dinner and thereafter retire to have an early night. I now start off with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Excellencies, the world has failed to keep temperatures to the 1.5 degree temperature rise limit, and about 80% of the world is sitting around this table. A temporary overshoot of this limit is now inevitable. Reaching the 1.5 degree limit is still possible by the end of the century, and that requires making this overshoot as small, short, and safe as possible. In any case, there will be dire consequences. More and worse heat waves, wildfires, floods, hurricanes, and hunger. Africa will pay a deadly price, despite doing very little to cause the problem. Avoiding more climate chaos means bridging the adaptation gap urgently as an essential element of climate justice. Developed countries must keep their promises, starting by doubling adaptation finance this year, and it is my firm belief that it is possible to triple adaptation finance by 2030 with the contribution of the multilateral development banks, as in COP29 in Baku. We must also safeguard the credibility of the Baku finance goals and capitalize the loss and damage fund, including innovative tools of finance. And in keeping with the ambitions of the United Nations Early Warnings for All initiative, we need to ensure everyone, everywhere, is protected by a life-saving alert system by 2027. We also need investments in resilience and technology to boost and protect food systems in the face of climate shocks and disasters. But all our efforts in adaptation will fall short unless we reach a drastic reduction of emissions in the next decade, going clearly beyond the present NDCs, which still lead to an increase of temperatures well beyond 2 degrees. And we need to supercharge the just transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, as described in the consensus of the Dubai in COP. Fortunately, the economics on our side. Last year, 90% of new power capacity came from renewables. Renewables are now the cheapest source of new electricity in nearly every country, and ensuring all countries benefit means providing financing and technology to help developing countries invest in grids, storage, and efficiency. And it means supporting workers and communities affected by the transition through training, protection, and new opportunities. All of these requires massive investment, debt relief, greater access to concessional finance, reform of the global financial system, all to give developing countries representation that reflects the realities of today's global economy. We need the G20 leadership and support as we build the resilient world people and planet require. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you for that input. I now call upon His Excellency, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mohammed Ali Yusuf.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Excellencies, it is a great honor for me to present the African Union Commission remarks for Session 2 on behalf of His Excellency Mohammed Ali Yusuf, Chair of the Commission. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for Africa, resilience is not aspiration but our daily reality. We therefore approach this topic with clarity. Resilience must be built on equity, investment, and justice. We applaud the South Africa G20 presidency for highlighting these matters in this G20 tenure. On disaster risk reduction, Africa has established the Africa Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Action System. It is strengthening national DRR strategies. Yet, only 40% of Africans are covered by multi-hazard early warning system, the lowest globally. We welcome, therefore, the G20 high-level voluntary principles for investing in DRR development under the South Africa G20 presidency. This will highlight anticipatory action, resilient infrastructure, and risk-sensitive investment. Our call is to translate these principles into financing aligned with African systems so that every African is protected by 2027 under the G20 Early Warnings for All initiative. In conclusion, Your Excellencies, a resilient world cannot be built without Africa. Our continental framework are ready, our political will is firm. What we require is a G20 partnership grounded in predictable financing, simplified access, and technology transfer, the one that respects Africa's development choices. It is time to move together from commitments to implementation and from principles to delivery. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I now ask His Excellency Dr. Carlo Monticelli, Governor of the Council of European Development Bank.
President Ramaphosa, leaders of the G20. Throughout history, the world has repeatedly faced periods of profound technological and societal change, periods that have shaken established systems. Time after time, it has been the most vulnerable who have shouldered a disproportionate share of the social, human, and economic burden that comes with such transitions. Present circumstances stand apart for two key reasons. First, the pace at which the change is unfolding and its fully global reach have no precedent. Second, there is a growing recognition that transition must be just. Safeguarding the most vulnerable is essential as it preserves social fabric that enables transformation themselves to happen. One transition in particular is taking center stage. The shift to sustainable economic systems driven by escalating natural hazards and deepening climate crisis. Multilateral development banks have scaled up their collective ambitions to support member countries in navigating this transition. Since 2019, MDBs have doubled support for adaptation investment, recognizing that well-being and jobs cannot be sustained where homes, schools, and business are under threat from flooding, drought, and other climate events. Solutions to respond to natural disasters are also developing. One example, in Seville, several MDBs joined the Debt Close Alliance, which, Within this broader MDB ecosystem, the Council of Europe Development Bank plays a distinctive role as Europe's social bank. It advances a climate social nexus approach, focusing on investments that strengthen the climate resilience of most vulnerable populations and communities. Looking ahead to 2026, MDBs stand ready to support their clients through this period of profound global transformation, ensuring that people remain at the core of the solutions we deliver. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. I now want to call, as you see me hesitate, I just had a whisper in my ear from the Secretary General of the United Nations, who has just told me that the main decision of the COP30 has just been approved. So the Secretary General is understandably very happy. And I congratulated him. Thank you very much, Secretary General, for sharing. Thank you so much. I now call upon Andrew Bailey, the Chair of the Finance Stability Board. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Your Excellency. Let me be very brief. Sustainable growth requires long-term engagement and long-term finance. And in turn, that requires us to understand the risks to that finance over the longer term. Climate change is undoubtedly one such risk. But the answer to that is not to have no or less finance. It's to use finance to support the transition to a sustainable future. The FSB has a role to play in helping the system to assess risks, providing frameworks to do that, and thereby to support sustainable finance. And I can give the assurance that is what we will do. Thank you.
That was nice and sweet. Thank you. 45 seconds. Excellent. Can I ask Mr. Clava Gatete, Under-Secretary General of UNECA, of United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Let's see if you will be able to beat that record.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I align myself with the statement by the Secretary General. Thank you so much.
Gee, we are on a roll. We are on a definite roll. Ms. Rebecca Gracepan Mayulfs, the Secretary General of UNCTAD.
I will have to do the same, Mr. President, and I align with the statement of the Secretary General of the UN.
Thank you so much. My next speaker is Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. I am going to give you time because you deal with a different matter altogether. WHO.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, President Ramaphosa, Excellencies. WHO welcomes the G20's endorsement of health security and resilient health systems in the declaration and the voluntary high-level principles of investing in disaster risk reduction. Likewise, we welcome South African presidency's focus on critical infrastructure. Strong health systems and early warning capacities are vital for preventing crises from becoming disasters. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed critical gaps in the world's health security defenses. We thank the G20 for its leadership in closing those gaps, including through the establishment of the Pandemic Fund and the Joint Finance and Health Task Force. In addition, WHO has also launched several initiatives for global health security based on COVID lessons. And as you know, at the World Health Assembly this year, WHO member states adopted the WHO Pandemic Agreement, which, when ratified, will become a landmark instrument of international law. Member states are now negotiating the Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System, or the PABS Annex, which will be critical for ensuring equitable access to vaccines and other medical countermeasures. We ask G20 countries to ensure those negotiations are completed in time for next year's World Health Assembly in May, because the next pandemic is not a question of if, but when. I thank you, and back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Tedros. My last speaker is His Excellency Maximo Tirino Cullen from the Food Agriculture Organization.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will try to be as brief as possible. In 2023, the world saw the steepest surge in food price inflation in decades. In low-income countries, food inflation reached 30%, pushing households' budget beyond their limits. This implies that the cost of a healthy diet rises substantially, making 2.4 billion people didn't have access to a healthy diet. Countries try to resolve this through different fiscal measures, social protection, and other measures. But Excellencies, the G20 can change this trajectory. Open, predictable food markets are essential, particularly for net food importing countries. We must also invest in resilience, as climate shocks will intensify in intensity and frequency. First, through prevention, anchored on early warning risk analytics, insurance, and One Health approaches. And second, by increasing countries' ability to cope when shocks happen, with a strong social protection and science and innovative-driven agricultural transformation, and trade policies that keep food accessible during these stresses. FAO's Financing for Shock-Driven Food Crisis facility tried to mobilize countries and private capital to strengthen prevention and enable anticipatory action. Through targeted investments and the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, we're trying to drive country-led agri-food system transformation at a scale to achieve this resilience. Excellencies, the world cannot wait. Leadership is needed now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to extend my thanks and gratitude to you all. And by way of concluding this, we'd like to say as South Africa, the global community is faced by several formidable and related issues. And a number of them are poverty, unemployment, food insecurity, inequality, environmental degradation, and climate change. The complexity of these challenges does call for enhanced action. Resilience is not merely about recovery after a disaster or crisis. It is about foresight, shared responsibility, and sustainable development. A resilient world can only be achieved through inclusive economic growth, strengthening global partnerships, and reforming international institutions. It means we must be prepared. We must, as a matter of urgency, integrate disaster risk reduction into macroeconomic policies, climate financing, and sustainable infrastructure development. We must also ensure that vulnerable countries and communities have equitable access to technologies, to finance, and the capacity to anticipate and withstand future shocks. As we look ahead, South Africa believes that our collective efforts should focus on three imperatives. Firstly, we must strengthen global early warning systems. For many countries, this means scaling up of investments in data, in technology, and capacity to reach the most vulnerable communities that may be exposed to danger. Second, we must mobilize innovative finance for resilience. The G20 should champion accessible, practicable, and equitable disaster risk financing instruments. We need to pool risk, mobilize anticipatory funding, and forge public-private partnerships. And thirdly, we must mainstream disaster risk reduction into all sectors of economic planning, from energy and infrastructure to agriculture and urban development as well. Sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth requires that we must take measures to address the severe imbalance in vulnerability to the increasing effects of climate change. Now, those countries most affected by severe weather events are often those that bear the least responsibility for climate change. This threatens to further deepen inequality between and within countries. Developing economies need resources and technical partnerships for effective adaptation. We need to make good on our commitments to fund loss and damage caused by climate change. And as 2025 marks the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, we recognize its historic contribution to fostering universal climate action. and yet global temperatures continue to climb. We have no choice but to fully effectively implement what we agreed to implement, and its temperature goal. In doing so, we must hold fast to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Just transition pathways are key enablers for climate action. These should encompass a whole of economy and a whole of society approach. In the face of persistent hunger and escalating climate pressures, we face a sobering reality. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization, as many as 700 million people are experiencing hunger worldwide. Excessive food price volatility continues to undermine purchasing power, especially for low-income communities. But we must applaud the G20